Her appearance suggested she was out of place. Worn ballet flats, a creased blouse, and a violin bundled in weathered fabric. The moment she entered, mockery burst forth. "Has maintenance gotten turned around? Are we holding a musical tryout or recruiting for charity?" A plastic seat was hurled her way. "Reserve the upholstered chairs for genuine artists." A pupil forced a grimy, poorly tuned practice violin upon her. "Let's discover how a shopping trolley sounds." She remained quiet. She simply took a seat and began to perform. After the third tone, the space became motionless. What they had dismissed as worthless had just caused the structure to vibrate. The concert hall of the esteemed Harmony Conservatory resonated with expectation, its plush seating occupied by refined performers gripping sparkling instruments. In the rear of the space, nearly invisible amid the splendor, Elena Harper occupied her seat, her simple linen garment, somewhat worn at the border, draped loosely over her thin build. Her aged canvas footwear, marked and dulled, emerged beneath the material. Her raven locks cascaded in gentle, natural curves across her shoulders, surrounding a countenance that was captivating in its plainness. Lovely, yet intentionally unembellished. At 19, Elena possessed a quiet resilience, her amber eyes surveying the room with peaceful awareness. This day marked the conservatory's yearly tryouts for the global exhibition, a showcase that might propel a performer's profession onto the worldwide platform. The space hummed with anxious anticipation as pupils murmured about who could claim the prized individual performance. Elena, though, remained isolated, her hands resting properly in her lap, a weathered violin container positioned beside her feet. She hadn't arrived to pursue recognition. Her purpose was far more intimate. Beyond the walkway, Professor Margaret Stein, a keen-eyed woman known for merciless expectations, bent toward her associate, Dr. Lawrence Brooks. Her attention settled on Elena, and a cynical expression pulled at her mouth. "Observe that individual," she whispered, indicating toward the rear seats. Audacious of her to believe that outfit suits stage illumination. Dr. Brooks, a lean gentleman with an inclination for harsh comments, traced her stare and laughed. "What comes next? Performing in burlap?" Their amusement attracted notice, and shortly murmurs spread across the room. Pupils turned to peer at Elena, their faces showing mixed sympathy and entertainment. Several concealed their mouths to mask their smiles. Elena's expression stayed calm, though her digits pressed more firmly around her violin case handle. She had encountered criticism previously, numerous occasions. Actually, it wasn't unfamiliar, yet it remained painful. In the forward section, Caleb Warner, a violin prodigy with groomed hair and a fitted jacket, overheard the ridicule. His standing as the conservatory's favored student was well-deserved, as was his conceit. He leaned toward his companion Sophie Kendall, a flutist with a cutting manner of speaking, and sneered. "Her appearance suggests she stumbled in from a second-hand shop," Caleb declared with sufficient volume for nearby listeners. "What brings her to this place?" Sophie laughed, flipping her shining curls. "Likely misdirected while seeking a sidewalk show." The room filled with gentle laughter, and Caleb's self-assurance expanded. He rose, smoothing imaginary particles from his sleeve, and spoke to the assembly with feigned kindness. "In fairness," he announced, his tone heavy with mockery, "we should grant her an opportunity, if only for our amusement." The laughter intensified, growing bolder. Several students applauded as though witnessing an actual show. As Elena moved across the room to collect her violin case, Sophie Kendall rose suddenly, her flute catching the chandelier light. "Wait!" she shouted, her voice piercing and dramatic. "We should ensure everyone observes our featured performer properly." She indicated Elena's dress with exaggerated sympathy, her lips forming a contemptuous smile. "Seriously? Was this meant to be a masquerade? Or are you simply without a looking glass?" The room thundered with laughter, students gesturing as Elena's face colored slightly, not from embarrassment but from the pure force of their hatred. Sophie returned to her seat, victorious as whispers of pitiful and humiliating snaked through the assembly. Elena's gaze shifted toward Caleb, yet she showed no reaction. Instead, she angled her head as though examining him. Her quietness only intensified the room's brutality. Professor Stein lifted an eyebrow, entertained. Indeed, Warner, since your generosity knows no bounds, perhaps you could retrieve an instrument for her. We'll discover if she can manage a bow properly. Caleb smiled and walked to a storage cabinet beside the platform. He emerged with a dusty, abandoned violin, its finish cracked, its strings dim and somewhat corroded. The instrument was an antique, one the conservatory had neglected to maintain. He extended it toward Elena with a dramatic gesture. "Your Stradivarius, madam," he announced, triggering another surge of laughter. Elena stood gracefully, her actions purposeful. She received the violin wordlessly, her fingers touching the aged wood with a gentleness that escaped the jeering crowd's notice. She transported it to the platform, her stride firm despite every watching eye's burden. The auditorium descended into mocking silence, expectations sparking like electricity. Before Elena could reach the platform, Professor Stein lifted her hand, quieting the room. With one motion, her eyes frigid as stone, focused on Elena's modest appearance. "Miss Harper, correct?" she spoke, her voice laden with patronization. "I must acknowledge your bravery. Most individuals would recognize better than to squander our time with such a—" She stopped, glancing at Elena's footwear. "Modest display." The term lingered like a strike, and several students chuckled, encouraged by her position. Elena met her stare without wavering, but the professor's remarks penetrated deeper than the laughter, a calculated reminder of her outsider status here. Dr. Brooks reclined in his seat, crossing his arms. "This promises to be educational," he grumbled. Sophie whispered to her neighbor, $10 says she cannot manage a simple scale. Elena stood isolated beneath the spotlight, the intense beam emphasizing her appearance's simplicity. She adjusted the violin's tuning pegs with skilled confidence, her fingers operating with quiet assurance that contrasted sharply with the room's contempt. The strings, despite being out of tune, responded to her handling, and within moments she had brought them into harmony. She tested the bow, drawing it gently across the strings, and a faint, clear tone pierced the silence. As Elena tuned the violin's pegs, Caleb leaned forward from his seat, his voice echoing across the quiet auditorium. "Handle that artifact carefully," he taunted, rising to loom over the stage's edge. He moved closer, his shadow covering her, and brushed an imaginary speck from his sleeve as though her presence contaminated the atmosphere. "Wouldn't want you damaging it, or yourself, while attempting to impress us." Several of his companions laughed, encouraging him, and he leaned nearer, his tone quiet yet poisonous. "Why not surrender now? Spare us all the vicarious shame." Elena's fingers hesitated momentarily on the strings, but she didn't gland. See up, her concentration serving as protection against his threatening presence. Caleb scoffed from his position. "Beginner's fortune." Elena shut her eyes briefly, as though finding her center. As Elena raised the violin to her chin, a whisper swept the audience, building into a chorus of muttered insults. "She's genuinely going to attempt this," one student hissed audibly enough for others to catch. Another contributed, "I wager she studied through online videos." Someone in the back section imitated a squealing violin, eliciting suppressed laughter that spread rapidly. The sound grew, a collective malice that seemed to push against Elena from every direction, challenging her to stumble. Yet she remained steady, her bearing erect, her eyes briefly closing as though to block their voices, not in surrender, but in resistance. Then, without introduction, she drew the bow across the strings. The initial note was gentle yet exact, a delicate strand of sound that seemed to float in the atmosphere. The second note emerged, fuller and more authoritative. By the third, the room became completely quiet. She began Sarasate's Carmen fantasy, a composition infamous for its technical challenges and passionate intensity. The music flowed from her like a tempest, every note clear, every phrase vibrant with power. Her bow moved across the strings, drawing impossible precision from the damaged instrument. Her fingers raced through complex sections, never hesitating, never hurrying. The melody rose and fell, now light-hearted, now devastating, creating an enchantment that held the audience spellbound. Professor Stein's smug expression disappeared. She leaned forward, her hands clutching her chair's armrests. Dr. Brooks's jaw dropped, his pen falling from his grasp to clatter on the ground. Caleb's assured smile froze, then vanished completely. Sophie's eyes expanded, her flute forgotten on her lap. Elena performed as though the room was empty. Her form moved gently with the music, but her face stayed peaceful, her us complete. The violin, despite its imperfections, soared under her control, its tone raw yet commanding. She navigated the piece's most dangerous passages with stunning accuracy, her phrasing filled with a profundity that revealed years, decades of dedication. In the wings, a young assistant professor, Clara Nunez, whispered to herself, That's how Menuhin used to interpret it." The concluding note rang out, sharp and victorious, before dissolving into silence. For a moment, nobody stirred. Then the auditorium burst into applause, stunned, passionate, unstoppable. Students jumped to their feet, their earlier mockery erased. Even those who had laughed most heartily now clapped, their faces showing wonder and guilt. Elena lowered the violin, her breathing even, her expression unaltered. She didn't revel in the applause or recognize the crowd's sudden worship. She simply remained there, the dusty instrument held in her hands, waiting. Professor Stein was first to speak, her voice shaking. "Young woman, what is your identity?" "Elena Harper," she answered quietly, her tone courteous but resolute. Dr. Brooks stood, adjusting his spectacles as though to see her better. "Where did you receive your training, Miss Harper? That performance was remarkable." The room pressed forward, eager for her response. Elena's mouth curved into a small, almost nostalgic smile. "I was Professor Keller's final pupil," she stated. "Before his death, I simply wanted his music to continue existing." The auditorium grew quiet again, the significance of her words descending upon them like mist. Professor Samuel Keller had been a legend, a solitary genius whose performances had transformed violin playing for an entire generation. He was famous for declining formal pupils, asserting none deserved his attention. Rumors had spread for years that he'd accepted one apprentice in his last days. Bizarre. Nobody knew the identity or if the story was accurate. Clara Nunez gasped audibly, her hand rushing to her mouth. "Keller? You studied with Samuel Keller?" Elena nodded once, her eyes far away. "He instructed me for 3 years until his passing." The panel members exchanged looks, their faces ashen. Professor Stein's earlier entertainment had vanished, replaced by something resembling terror. Dr. Brooks collapsed into his chair, muttering, "Dear heavens." Caleb fidgeted uncomfortably in his seat, his hands balled into fists. Sophie gazed at the ground, her cheeks red with mortification. The room's previous cruelty now loomed like a specter, impossible to dismiss. Professor Stein cleared her throat, attempting to recover her control. "Miss Harper, that was a remarkable performance. We would like to present you with the solo role in the International Showcase. It represents a unique opportunity." "Thank you," Elena interrupted softly. "However, I would prefer not to accept the solo." A murmur of astonishment rippled through the assembly. Caleb's head jerked up, his eyes narrowing as though he couldn't grasp her rejection. Elena proceeded, her voice steady yet warm. "I would like to suggest something different. There are students elsewhere who cherish music as deeply as I do, but cannot afford studies here. If I receive any recognition, I would request that the conservatory establish a scholarship fund in Professor Keller's honor for them." The panelists blinked, taken aback. Dr. Brooks recovered initially, nodding slowly. "That represents a noble request, Miss Harper. We will give it serious thought." "This isn't about nobility," Elena said, her gaze steady. "It concerns what is just. Music shouldn't be confined behind financial barriers." The room fell quiet once more, her words echoing with a clarity that shamed the earlier ridicule. Clara Nunez wiped moisture from her eye, her expression showing quiet respect. "Professor," Stein paused, then nodded. "Very well. We'll address the scholarship immediately. But Miss Harper, you must realize you've secured a position here today. Your ability is undeniable." Elena tilted her head, a gesture of recognition rather than acceptance. "Thank you. But my purpose here wasn't self-proof. I came to commemorate my instructor." With that, she descended from the platform, her violin still in hand. The applause accompanied her, gentler now, almost worshipful. As she passed the front section, Caleb looked away, his jaw clenched. Sophie twisted her flute nervously, unable to face Elena's gaze. In the following days, the conservatory buzzed with Elena's performance. Students retold the audition in hushed voices, as though afraid to disturb the memory. The panel held an urgent meeting and within a week announced the Samuel Keller Scholarship Fund, a complete tuition program for gifted musicians from disadvantaged communities. Elena's name was connected to the initiative, though she had insisted it honor Keller exclusively. The consequences for those who had ridiculed her were immediate and severe. Caleb Warner received a semester suspension, his behavior deemed a violation of the conservatory's conduct standards. The morning after the audition, the conservatory's main hall overflowed for an emergency gathering. Caleb Warner stood before the faculty, his usual arrogance replaced by humiliated shame. Professor Stein, her expression severe, announced his suspension to the silent assembly. "Your behavior dishonored this institution," she declared, her voice slicing through the air. "You ridiculed a colleague whose talent exceeds your own. For that, you will spend a semester in contemplation off campus." Caleb's eyes fell to the floor, the weight of every stare crushing his arrogance. Whispers trailed him as he departed, the golden boy now serving as a warning towel, his future at Harmony hanging precariously. Sophie Kendall encountered a similar punishment, her scholarship placed under examination. Sophie Kendall's judgment arrived during a private session with the conservatory's disciplinary committee. Her scholarship, once a source of pride, now faced jeopardy. Her flute performances were overshadowed by her participation in Elena's humiliation. Dr. Brooks, who had chuckled at her taunts, now sat expressionless as he read the board's verdict. Her funding remained on probation, her restoration dependent on a public apology and required ethics education. Sophie's hands shook as she exited the room, her cutting remarks silenced, her standing among peers deteriorating. The information spread rapidly, a harsh reminder that talent alone couldn't erase malice. Professor Stein and Dr. Brooks issued public apologies, their statements carefully composed yet genuine. The conservatory's atmosphere shifted, even if marginally, as students whispered about the girl who had overturned their world. Elena, meanwhile, pursued her studies quietly. She attended lectures, practiced in vacant rehearsal spaces, and declined every interview opportunity that arrived. When questioned about rejecting the solo, she would only respond, "The music holds more importance than the platform." One evening, as she departed the conservatory, a younger student, a shy pianist named Lily, approached her. "Elena," she said hesitantly, "I witnessed the audition. I didn't laugh, but I didn't intervene either. I apologize." Elena smiled, her eyes compassionate. "You're present now. That's what matters." Lily gripped her sheet music, feeling encouraged. "What you accomplished changed everything. People discussed the scholarship, about Keller, about you." I didn't act for myself, Elena said, adjusting her violin case strap. I acted for him and for anyone who's been told they're unwelcome. As she walked away, her silhouette outlined against the declining sun, Lily overheard a passing student whisper to another, "She doesn't require the spotlight. She embodies the illumination." Elena's pace remained steady. She had no use for their praise, no desire for their redemption. She carried Keller's music within her soul, and that was sufficient. If this story made your heart pause, don't forget to like, share, comment, and